Hi, everyone. Welcome to the International and Defense Policy Speaker Series. I'm Stephanie Von Latke, the director of the CIDP. Today, I'm really delighted to welcome Brigadier General Lise Bourgon as our speaker. General Bourgon, as many of you know, is the Canadian Visiting Defense Fellow at the CIDP. And before that, General Bourgon was Chief of Operations at the Canada Joint Operational Command and Director General Operations at the Strategic Joint Staff. During her fellowship at the CIDP, General Bourgon has been teaching, delivering presentations and briefings, co-organizing events with us, and conducting research and analysis on the Canadian Armed Forces goal to have women make up 25.1% of its ranks. General Bourgon is also the CAF's champion for women, peace, and security, which makes her particularly well-suited to provide us with this update on the implementation of UNSCR 1325 and the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. General Bourgon, thank you so much for engaging with our CIDP fellows, students, and friends. Take the time you need for your presentation, and I will be back to moderate the Q&A in a little bit. The virtual floor is yours, or the screen is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Stephanie. So give me a second, I'll share the screen. So everyone should be able to see the presentation now. As Stephanie said, I'm Brigadier General Lise Bourgon. I'm the CAF champion for Women, Peace and Security and the CAF Visiting Defense Fellow here at the CIDP. So in the next 35 minutes, I will briefly look at UNSCR 1325. I will examine the CAF WPS agenda and the integration of the UN 1325 in Canadian defense policy and operation. I will also look at the key achievements, the challenges, and the way forward. My presentation this morning or this afternoon is in English, but of course, during the Q&A, please feel free. If anyone wants to ask a question in French, I'm more than happy to respond in French. So just a brief overview of Security Council Resolution 1325. So the resolution was adopted in 2000 after some exceptional commitment and some really dedicated work by the Women's Civil Society Group and member states of the UN. The resolution establishes the importance of gender equality for international peace and security and recognizes the disproportionate impact of armed conflict on women and girls. 1325 was also the first resolution to promote the adoption of a gender perspective to identify and hopefully correct the differential impact of conflict on women, men, girls, and boys. Resolution 1325 was the first of a suite of related resolutions known collectively as the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. In all, 10 resolutions link the gender equality and recognitions of gender perspective in national plans, policy, and action to the achievement of peace and security. Of course, UNSCR 1325 is centered on 4 pillars that you can see on the slide. The first one, the protection of women and girls from sexual and gender-based violence. The second, the prevention of violence against women and girls through the promotion of women's rights, accountability, and law enforcement, including ending impunity, supporting local women's peace initiatives and conflict resolution processes, and also strengthening women's rights under international and national law. The third pillar is the participation of women at all levels of decision-making, and that we're including all mechanisms for the prevention, the management, and resolution of conflict and peace negotiation, but also and peace operation. And that's where we're seeing the increased demand for women, soldiers, police, and civilian in UN operation. The fourth pillar is really focused on post-conflict reconstruction. It ensures that the unique needs of those affected by conflict are met and that all women voices are included when we are rebuilding a society. Therefore, we ensure that women's needs such as health, education, justice, legal access to property, political participation, housings are accounted for, because of course the needs of men and the needs of women and girls are quite different. So following the ratification of 1325, Canada launched its first National Action Plan in 2010 and tabled its second National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security in 2017. In this National Action Plan, the Canadian government reaffirmed its commitment to integrating a gender perspective in its whole of government policy. The National Action Plan states that women, peace, and security is indeed at the heart of Canada's feminist foreign policy that includes its feminist international assistance policy and also its new defense policy. So indeed, Canada's new defense policy, Strong, Secure, and Engage, has a strong focus on gender equality and diversity. The CAF efforts to recruit more women into the CAF and to address sexual misconduct, as outlined in the defense policy, are telling examples of the interconnectedness between the Women, Peace, and Security agenda and what we do at home at CAF. As part of this plan, the CAF D&D implementation plan speaks of 4 main themes that we call really our lines of operation. They're shown on the slide, but the first one is governance and accountability, which look at the implementation of the tenets of the UNSCR and also the departmental diversity strategy. It looks at supporting the international cooperation, the monitoring, and the reporting. The second line of effort is training and education. And this line looks at all current and future gender perspective and GBA training and education approaches. The third line, the one that we're probably going to spend a little bit more time today, is recruitment and retention. And that line of effort includes the increase to the recruitment of the women in the CAF, so the objective of 25.1 by 2026. Increase the retention of women in the CAF, which is quite important if we're going to reach that 25.1. And also increase the number of women in senior level position in national defense. The last line of operation is integration of all the lines of efforts, but mostly looking at integration into operation. And inside that line is increase the number of women deployed in international operation, and also the role of gender advisor and gender focal point in all specific unit and also on operation. So of course, the GBA plus tool. So the GBA base, the gender-based analysis was a key part of the 1995 Federal Plan for Gender Equality, which Canada adopted following the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing. In that, at that conference, the government of Canada committed to conducting GBA plus on all future legislation, policies, and programs. Gender-based analysis plus is indeed an analytical tool used to assess how diverse groups of women, men, and gender diverse people may experience policies, programs, and initiatives. The plus, of course, in GBA plus acknowledges that the analysis goes beyond biological, which is really the sex, and social cultural, which is the gender differences. We all have multiple identity factors that intersect to make us who we are. So the GBA plus also considers many other identity factors like race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, age, and mental or physical disability. The GBA Plus is now a mandatory process that reminds all decision makers that policies must be assessed through a feminist lens based on all identity factors such as race, gender, ethnicity, religion, like I said, age, and everything else. And it's an awesome tool that we're really working hard in implementing in CAF and D&D because it's the main tool that we're going to be making a difference here. So In 2016, the CDS issued its direction on how CAF was going to implement UNSCR 1325. Its end states was that gender perspective became incorporated as a routine and a common element of all CAF activities, domestic and deployed, but also institutionally. To support this, the two major line of efforts were identified. The line of effort one, the operational effect. So this LOE really focused on the integration of the gender perspective into the planning, the execution, and the evaluation of operation. It also includes the initial education and training needs analysis. This line is complete. LOE 2 is more on the institutional effect. So this LOE focuses on embedding the UNSCR 1325 requirements into the CAF approach to the leadership, the management, and the command and control. This also includes the education, the policy, programs, and material acquisition. So this line is partially complete. I mean, all the pieces are in place, but it needs a little bit of maturity, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. This time, a new CDS and a deputy minister directive should be issued shortly to provide more updated direction for that institutional line of effort, especially on the conduct of GBA Plus analysis on policies and procurement project, on the training and education piece, and monitoring and reporting. So this is a pretty interesting slide because it depicts really the extent that we need to integrate GBA Plus into the DNA of defense. So I mean, we're getting there. The progress is steady, but it needs to continue. So as you can see, all the bubbles here are all the different pieces of the CAF and D&D where indeed GBA Plus needs to be integrated. So for the majority of the people, I mean, they easily see how the WPS fits with the conduct of operations, both domestically and internationally. What we're still fighting here a little bit, and there's a bit of resistance, is the integration of GBA Plus and everything else that CAF and D&D does, from, like I said, capability development, procurement, infrastructure, and of course, recruiting and retention. It's gaining ground, but a bit more slowly on the institutional side than on the operational side. So I'll just take a few seconds to talk about GBA Plus and international operation. So of the two lines of operation briefed earlier, the integration of GBA Plus into Ops has been completed and it is indeed a great success. Not because I was working at CJOC before and that was mainly my agenda, but it's going very well. GBA Plus training has been integrated into all pre-deployment training. It's mandatory requirement for everyone who's deploying. We have a really good pool of gender advisors that are trained and qualified and are ready to deploy on domestic and also on international operation. In the last 3 years, there has been either a full gender advisor or a gender focal point, which has deployed on all Canadian international operations. Furthermore, gender perspective has been integrated in our operation planning process, the OPP, and it is being taught and it's being exercised at the Army Staff College here in Kingston and also in Toronto. Gender is being played in all the exercise and it's integrated in all the scenarios because we all know that if you don't exercise something, you just don't learn it. Further to this, CAF has developed an aide-mémoire on how to integrate gender perspective in ops. It was launched at the UN session last fall, and it's available online for everyone to access. It's a really, really good tool telling you exactly how to integrate gender perspective into ops. And finally, we're seeing a huge improvement on the proportion of senior CAF women in operation. Last year was a huge milestone for CAF as 6 out of the 19 expeditionary missions were indeed led by women. Major General Carignan led NMI. Commander José Kurtz was the commanding officer of Standing Naval Maritime Group 1. And the Op Unifier, Cobalt, Op Présence, and Soprano were all led by women. So the success here is twofold. First is that Canada has the right women trained and qualified to command. So that is victory by itself. But the second is on the international front, that we are showing the rest of the world that women can be very, very good leader and can do the job as well, and in some cases better than men could do. Now, on the domestic piece, gender-based analysis is also well integrated into domestic ops, which we saw for the first time concrete result in the floods in Quebec in 17 and also in 18. And we also saw the result in the LCTF and les CHSLD last summer. We have CIMIC teams that are now being leveraged to gather data, disaggregated data, really understanding the population, and look at who might be affected differently by disaster and who might access relief efforts differently. Because again, gender-based analysis is really dependent on understanding the population and have access to those data. So CAF resources were prioritized to deliver healthcare providers to the affected area, like just in time, but to the right spot. So GBA Plus in its application had a very positive effect on the operations, and it allowed the commander to make a resource allocation decision based actually on the actual needs of the community. Now, on the key achievements, like much progress has been done. Like the key achievements have been numerous. Just recently, there was the merger of two different organization in CAF, and the merger of those two created the Directorate of Gender Equality and Intersectional Analysis. It's a mouthful to say, especially if you're saying it very, really fast. But this organization now has got about a team of military and civilian experts, and they're really the SMEs of the CAF and DND. And their mandate is to guide and support and to coordinate with all the defense team efforts in the use of GBA Plus and advancing the WPS agenda. So that was a huge success, and I think it's going to get better as the office is fully developed and they get the manning of all their individual, and then they get connected through each of the L1 in a supporting role. We're also working really hard at integrating the GBA Plus requirements into all project approval. So from a procurement process, the GBA Plus as now is being looked at as 20% as a rated criteria for targeting engagement grants. So as like the MINDS program, 20% of the evaluation is really on the GBA Plus. And of course, the big progress has been on the increase in women recruitment, diversity-focused marketing, increased enrollment of women. But again, I will talk to this a little bit more later in my presentation. Another key piece for us is the international piece. CAF is indeed one of the leaders in the implementation of the WPS agenda in the world. We are participating in numerous committees. I'm just going to name a few, but the NATO Committee on Gender Perspective and the UN WPS CHOD, Chief of Defense Network. In 2019, the chairmanship of the UN CHOD Network Committee was transferred to General Vance, now to Admiral McDonnell. The network was initiated to provide a collaborative platform for all the CHODs who have committed to advance the WPS agenda within their defense force. We truly believe that sharing experiences, lessons observed, and best practices each of the members will enhance their shared understanding and knowledge, thereby increasing their ability to move their own WPS agenda forward inside their own defense. So far, the network has grown to 52 nations, and indeed, it continues to expand. Another key aspect is the military training and cooperation program flagship contribution to the WPS agenda, being the integration of women and gender perspective in the Armed Forces Workshop launched in 2017. So this workshop instructs on the evolving role of women in military and security environments and brings awareness to gender issues in peace support operation. Last year, 4 serials of this workshop were delivered in Benin, Ecuador, Malaysia, and Uganda. A total of 101 participants from 47 different countries received this training. There's next serial is going to be online, of course, in February, and it includes Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and I'm missing another country. And another serial is going to be done in March. So this is a really, really interesting course where we can really on the world stage work on the women, peace, and security. Now, let's look at the key challenges, because it's nice to recognize the progress and the things that are going very well, but it's also very important to look at the challenges, because these are the one that we really need to focus on to make ourselves better. So like I said, there's been some huge progress in the last 5 years, but there's still a lot of work to do. Internal awareness and understanding of the women, peace, and security agenda inside of CAF and at the DND, and also at some point at the political level, remains low. There is still a lot of confusion on the relationship between GBA plus, the employment equity legislation, and the diversity and integration folders. As you can see below, like, you know, they're all working together in 2 different categories, but symbiotic relationship between the 2. There's still a wide misunderstanding within the DND and CAF regarding how policies and programs will affect or advance the WPS agenda. Monitoring and reporting on progress of implementation remains extremely difficult. Again, it's that perception that WPS is about women on operation. And hopefully, as you've seen so far, it's just so much more than that. So those are the key where we're really going to need to focus on is that institutional piece, and making, you know, if I go back to the slides with all the bubbles, so that everyone understand their little piece of the puzzle and we can all work together. Another key challenge is that although that GBA Plus has been integrated into all CAF training in education, the training that was produced is still a bit rough. It's ad hoc and it's not always standardized. So CDA, like the Canadian Defense Academy, has started training needs analysis to really look and more in depth at the training and education and take it to the next step. Honestly, what we need to see is training and education and a little bit of that WPS, of that gender intelligence, that knowledge being integrated into every piece of training, from when someone joins the military as a private and goes to Saint-Jean, all the way to the end where we do training for general officers and flag officers. It's got to be embedded in everything we do, training and education, in little pieces, so that it builds on the knowledge and the experience and the responsibility. So that's really the next step that we have to do. The last big challenge, and I've put it in red here, is indeed achieving the 25.1% women representation in CAF by 2026. I think it's the goal that will be the most difficult, and I'd like to take a few minutes here to examine the situation, as it is a little bit of a wicked problem, and it's important to take a little bit of time to look into it. So this slide shows the slow but constant increase of women in the CAF alongside some key milestones for gender integration in the CAF in the last 40 years. As you can see, in the last 5 years, the rate of growth has been positive, but at about 0.1% per year versus the 1% that is indeed required to meet the goal of 25% by 2026. As of last November, the CAF employs about 10,500 women and the reg forces, which is about 15.8%, and just a little bit over 5,000 reserve forces, which is a little bit higher, 16.7%. So when we take those two numbers and we combine them, 16.1 is the women total population in the CAF. If we project by end state 2026 to reach 25.1%, the CAF will require about 25,500 women, a growth of almost 10,000 women, and that will be required, of course, to a balance of recruitment, mostly recruitment. So there's a lot of work to do here in order to achieve these numbers. But before we examine more closely the number and the role of women in the military, I think it's important to first have a look at women's participation in the workforce in Canada. Just to compare apples to apples, as of 2016, a census done in 2016, 48% of the Canadian workforce are women. Yet, despite some progress, 56.1% of women are still employed in industries and occupation that aligns with women's traditional gender roles, such as teaching, social work, sales and services, nursing, and related health occupation, or clerical and other administrative position. And this compares to 17% of men doing the same thing. So this gender distribution across occupations has barely changed since 1987, when about 59.2% of women and 15.7% of men were employed in the more traditional female occupation. So we can clearly see here that gender roles and cultural identities are still very powerful for Canadian women. So this is really the slide of where the women in the Canadian Armed Forces are being employed. I'm sure it's a bit hard for everyone to understand if you're not in the military background, but the bottom of the slide here has all the occupation. And when we look at that, as of September 2020, 50% of women in the reg forces are employed in 8 military occupations. So human resource administrator, supply technician, logistics officer, financial service administrator, medical technician, nursing officers, mobile support equipment operator, cook, and dental technicians. So you can see here again, 50% of the women in CAF are still very much being employed in traditional female role. So the same gender role affiliation, cultural identities are similarly reflected in the CAF today, the same one that we saw in the previous slide for the civilian women. So that we can see that on that front, the Canadian Armed Forces are truly a reflection of Canadian society. But we need to change that, because we need to attract women, we need to attract more women, but we also need to attract women in the non-traditional role. And we're having a lot of difficulty, and that's where we need to focus. But how to change this and how to attract more women? Because indeed the data that we have is not very positive. In 2017, Earnscliffe Strategy Group conducted a survey across more than 2,000 female participants. And it showed that the military is not an occupation of interest for women. I mean, honestly, out of 20 occupational fields, the military was second only to the last was second only to the mining sector as the field of least interest to enter. And out of those participants, only three selected the military as their primary interest. So we are, far from the minds of women. And again, as I said earlier, gender roles and cultural identities are still powerfully ingrained in Canada. And that's a hard challenge. How do you change that? Because it's more than changing the CAF culture, it's also changing Canadian culture. Furthermore, honestly, the negative perception held by Canadian women that being a CAF member requires frequent separation from family and friends, concerns about risk and physical dangers and operation, being harassed or victims of sexual violence, and apprehension about maintaining work-life balance, they all indicate that CAF may also have an image problem, and that positive cultural change needs to be better demonstrated to the average Canadian women before they'll voluntarily or be attracted to the military and make that decision to come in. So for the few that are interested in, and the women that are joining the military today, the majority of them really join for the same reason as their male counterparts: education and training, the travel and the adventure, for a relevant and challenging career, job stability and income, camaraderie, and friendships. But again, from all the surveys and the studies that we've done, is we see that the women that have been in cadets, so have experience in cadets, or women which have family or friends that are in the military, they have that influence. They will influence them joining the military more for the women than for the male. So we realized that indeed we had a challenge on our hands, how to attract and recruit more women. And I said, especially in the non-traditional occupation. So to work on the diversity problem set, special teams were created, amalgamating members from various workforce. We looked at, combining military and civilian, human resource specialists, researchers, operators, to really look at the challenges and find creative way to attract, to recruit and retain women and greater number. Outside the box thinking was paramount, and there's a panoply of new initiatives that were conceived and implemented. And I'll just touch a few of them here, but from a recruitment perspective, attraction programs were created specifically to target women preconceived views and opinion about CAF that were during research. Videos were specifically developed targeting women, focusing on various employment fields, really humanitarian service versus combat side, work-life balance, and inclusivity. Also, the Canadian Force Recruiting Group began projecting outreach and attraction teams to different communities, to special events to try to recruit more women. Also, we've looked at intake process, which really looks at the activities relating to the processing. And there's been a lot of changes, like female applications are now being prioritized to accelerate the intake process. So, when a female file and a male file comes in, they'll prioritize all the female file first with appointment and testing and all that stuff, so that we can really focus as many women as we can. We're also looking at, especially for a military college, looking at early offers for women, so that we can get them in as soon as possible. We have not changed the standard, and I want to be very careful here. Like, they have to meet the same standard, but if they meet the standard, then they'll be offered early offers. And this has led to really, really good success for the military college. We saw last year that all the files that came in and meeting the standards, all the women were actually recruited, and there's 77 women that started the RMC year last year, 23%. So it was really, really good. We're also working on continued research with DGMPRA, looking at the MINDS program, the ideas, looking at how we can target diversity, minority group, LGBTQs, the new millennials, the Generation Z, because those are the target. This is the recruitment pool, and we need to better understand what they think, how they think, and what will get them in. A great program too was the Women in Forces, which was a super cool initiative, I think, that was developed, and 4 pilot courses were delivered in 2017. So the Women in Forces program was really a realistic job preview for potential female recruits, so that they better understand what they're getting it. So it was anywhere between there was a 10-day program, but there was also a 3-day program where the women showed up on the base and hands-on. They got to talk to people. They did the forces tests, which really for them got them to understand that, yes, they can do it, and also a better understanding of what the CAF is. And it's been really, really successful. To date, 26% of the original candidate have joined the forces. But more than that, more than the candidate joining, what we realize is that the people that did the program have a better understanding of the CAF, and they have a more of a positive outlook on the CAF, so that when they talk to other people, the image of the CAF is more positive. And we've seen that this is quite interesting for women, because that's what women will need to join the military, is have a more positive perception. So this is the challenge slide. So following all the efforts and the new initiative that I just mentioned above, last year we saw the recruitment of about 1,900 new women out of about 10,000 new recruits. So it was about 18.6% of the recruits were women, an increase of almost 2% from the previous year. But this chart was produced by DGMPRA, and I put for illustrative purpose only because this was done pre-COVID, so the numbers will have to be adjusted. But you can observe and you can see that to make the 25.1%, in fiscal year 2021 all the way to fiscal year 25-26, we will need an average about 3,600 female coming in the door. About 36% of the recruits will need to be female to reach our goal of 25.1. Last year, like I said, with every effort that we did, we didn't hit the 19%. 18.6 is what we had. So, and of course, for every year that we don't reach the goal of 36%, well, the year after gets bigger and bigger. So it's going to be a challenge. So as inclusion, excellent progress has been done on the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the last 5 and 6 years. That's really when we've started really putting a lot of emphasis. Of the 2 lines of efforts, integrating gender into our ops has been the easiest and has an excellent momentum going. The institutional line to integrate GBA Plus has been a little bit more difficult, but mostly because honestly, people did not understand what they were supposed to do. They did not understand their role. I think when we're going to focus on better training, people have more experience now understanding how to integrate GBA Plus into procurement process. We have strong leadership support. Everyone's on board. So it's really, really picking up speed. As far as more women in the military and the goal of 25.1%, we're working very hard on it. But personally, I think that achieving it by 2026 will be very challenging, almost impossible. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that we abandon. Okay, CAF must continue its diversity efforts for continued operational success. Like diversity is paramount to operational success. And we need to continue also to remain an employer of choice on the Canadian labor market. So the last 30 years, I've seen great progress towards women integration in the CAF. My take at it, and the studies and everything I've seen in my experience, and that's my experience, is that the only way to eventually achieve that 25.1% will be really to change the paradigm from integration to inclusion. Again, it is my opinion and my experience that far too long women have been allowed in, but they've been kept on the periphery, not allowed to fully participate as who they fundamentally are, women. We can see that, CAF has gender neutral policies, which is great, but gender neutral policies don't really serve women. Fair is not equal, and equal is not always fair. Women and men are different. Okay, let's look at those differences and adjust. After all, inclusion is about creating the condition so that women and men can be their best and they feel value. So from an inclusion perspective, the CAF warrior culture will need to be relooked. It's not appealing to the majority of women or minorities, nor do we feel comfortable in that role. Additionally, human resources policies, the hateful conduct and sexual harassment, the equipment, the infrastructure, the career progression, performance reviews and promotion, education and training, family support, and health program are all different pieces that will need to be looked at again and will require fundamental change in order to really be truly inclusive towards women. So honestly, that's the work ahead if we are serious about diversity. So before I open the floor to any question, again en anglais or en français, ça me dérange pas, I really would like to recognize the support from the Director General Military Personnel Research and Analysis, DGMPRA, and also to the Chief of Military Personnel to access to their research material, their support and their time. They've really been invaluable and all the research that I've done, and they've been awesome. So I'll stop sharing now and open the floor for questions.
Thank you so much, General Bourgon. And just a reminder for our audience that you can use the Q&A function to pose any questions that you have at this time. And maybe I'll break the ice with the first question, which is more on the operational side of things. Thank you for providing a sort of detailed outlook in terms of how this agenda fits into domestic operations and international operations. And I'm wondering if we can ask you to illustrate with a few more examples from operations that are currently being conducted abroad, because it strikes me that integrating a gender-based analysis into operational planning might look quite different in a UN peacekeeping context than it might in a NATO-led mission in Iraq or NATO-led activity like those taking place in the Baltics and Poland. So I'm wondering if you can sort of illustrate the diversity of what that looks like on the ground through operations. And certainly your role at CJOC last year would help inform that.
Yeah, it's an awesome question. I mean, every mission has a different environment and a different circumstances. I mean, the gender-based analysis or the gender integration and missions such as the EFP and Latvia are quite different than a NATO mission in Iraq. So we have to adjust because again, the gender play is quite different. So commanders are trained, planners are trained, they understand what gender-based analysis, what is the integration of gender in operation. I mean, I always look at it as a pair of glasses, you put on. They're not pink glasses because it's not only about women and men, they're multicolored, and it's all the factors that I talked about with the plus. So the planners understand. The people on the ground have an idea of what they should be looking for in gender and the environment, the human security aspect. And there's also, of course, a gender advisor. The majority of the big mission have gender advisor, and for the gender advisor, it's really their role. I mean, they report directly to the commander, and that's their focus is looking at that human security environment and what are the needs on the ground. And of course, depending on the needs of the ground, talk to the planners, talk to the ops, talk to the people, and try to integrate a gender perspective actually in the day-to-day ops. So like in NATO mission Iraq, we had the gender advisor in there. We also had an RCMP was a gender advisor for the American-led mission in Iraq. We had on op I believe it's Soprano in South Sudan. A Canadian was the gender advisor for the UN mission. So that is where we can go in, understand the environment, and really make some tactical change on the ground.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have a first question here from Ellen Humany asking, ma'am, if we are perceived as a country with a radical feminist agenda abroad, yet we have a cultural problem with women employed in traditional gender roles. How do we combat this as an institution, the Canadian Armed Forces, if it is a greater cultural problem? And as a deployed member myself, Janad on Op Unifier, how do I advise my counterparts in the Ukrainian government to address these cultural disparities if we have not necessarily as a country done so?
Well, I think, I think showing the rest of the world that we're not perfect and that we look like them is the best way of connecting. I mean, I've always been against preaching, and it's a dichotomy that every country is God. I mean, the gender roles are still present, and that's the reality. So yes, we need to accept that and work on changing that. It's a wicked problem, and it's going to take a lot of time to do that. But I think that's the basis to also connect with the other countries what were involved. And there's a bit of a difference. Like I would look at the Canadian population and the traditional role as more of a strategic problem. But the military were also, I mean, we action at the tactical field and at the operational field. And that's where the GenAd has a role to play to make changes on the ground. So, I guess when you look at it, the elephant can be, you can't eat an elephant with one bite. There's many, many bites that needs to be taken to eat that elephant. And that's how we have to look at it. But we're not, we have not reached the complete success. There's still work for us to do, and we need to look at it and continue working in that direction.
If I may add to that, just in terms of the terminology of radical feminist, I would say that a radical feminist reading on this would be the elimination of the armed forces and the military. I suppose that the integration and implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is a quite conventional, mainstream, feminist approach to change. I'll also maybe say that I actually view the identification of those disparities, whether they're gender-based or cultural, as part of that gender-based analysis work that's so important societally, and certainly through the context of missions like the one that you are deployed to, Op Unifier. So asking the questions like that is the performance of a gender-based analysis, and so very much in line with the goal of a gender advisor and the broader goals as they've been described by General Bourgon today.
And I think too, can I add something on the, radical feminist is not something that the military, it's not a language, a jargon that the military uses. I think, from a gender perspective, gender sensitivity, that's where we are. So, there's a difference there, and we just have to be careful in the words that we're using also.
Yeah, but I think it raises a really important point about sources of resistance that might come in the accomplishment of certain duties, and certainly not referring to Op Unifier in particular, but having had an opportunity to visit the battle groups in Latvia and Lithuania, and the same thing with NMI in Iraq and KFOR in Kosovo, everyone has a different take on what the gender advisor's role is and how that gender-based analysis should feature through the various mission tasks. I think there's a lot of also potential resistance out there, especially in the multilateral context where, maybe not everyone's had the same exposure to the women, peace and security agenda or the training and education opportunities that General Bourgon mentioned. So I guess I want to ask next as a question, what are some of those organizational sources of resistance, either within the Canadian Armed Forces or abroad? I think you've mentioned a broad list of challenges, definitely, when it comes to implementation, when it comes to recruitment and retention, when it comes to monitoring and so on. And those are really constructive and very important to tackle. But there's also more overt forms of organizational resistance in the day-to-day. And I'm reading that a little bit in the question as it was posed, or maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I think that it certainly exists. And so as a military leader, and certainly as the CAF champion for women in peace and security, how do you view that particular challenge of more overt forms of resistance?
Yeah, well, there's a few resistance, but I think the big one, and I mean that again, it's the dichotomy of why we're doing it. Are we doing it because we've been told to do it, and that's legislation? Or are we doing it because we understand the strength behind diversity and the strength that GBA brings and the operational success? So honestly, I think we've moved from we have to do it because someone told me that I have to do it, to people now understand why. They understand the operational success and the strength that it will give to the operation and the longevity of the success. I mean, if you have women present like in the what is the statistics, but if you have people present like women involve, the success rate is much higher than if it's only part of the population. So, it is important to do. It is important for everyone to understand why we're doing it. Okay, so that is the first challenge. The second challenge is that this is not a female problem. And that is a big one where we need to take ownership. We need to get the men involved because we're going to change that together. A gender advisor, because you're a woman doesn't mean that you're a gender advisor. Okay. A gender advisor is someone that has been given the responsibility to do this job, but it can be anyone. And I think having the balance of male and female gender advisor is the best way because we think differently again. And in some occasion, it's better for gender to be briefed by a man than to be briefed by a woman. So that balance of responsibility, again, like, in the early days, it was a women job to do the GBA plus or do the rest. And I think we're moving away from that. We need to listen to the men. We need to get them involved. We need to educate because, again, when you look at diversity, it's not a battle on who's better, and it's not women are going to take more space and will leave less space for the men. The same thing for the minority. I mean, it's the strength of the diversity so that together we can work better and we can have a deeper solution that will work for the environment. So it's not a win-lose. Win for women, lose for men. It's got to be a win-win. And for that, we need the men on board with us together.
It's almost like you can read the current question that is being posed by Dr. Sarah Hill. It's a nice segue anyway. So she writes, thank you for a fascinating presentation, General Bourgon. I'm currently an instructor at RMC this term, and I'm giving a course on gender in the military. One of the themes that comes up frequently revolves around what is being done to prepare the ground and address men's attitudes so that they become more effective allies and supporters on the inclusion of women in the CAF. For example, some current practices like the PPT PPT standards for women and men at RMC lead to some problematic interpretations and perceptions regarding the relative competence of women and men as military members. What would you suggest as strategies for communicating the reality that initiatives aimed to increase the participation of women do not actively detract from or decrease the opportunities for men? So you already started to speak to that, but I'll let you elaborate further.
It's interesting because it's always, like I said, you know, men and women are different. We're different physically. We're different psychologically. We're different behaviorally. I can't say that word in English. Le comportement est un peu différent. So understanding that is the first victory. Okay. I've just finished reading a great book on gender intelligence, and it's exactly talking about the differences between men and women. You know, how the brain is wired and pieces of our brain, the way female are designed makes us better to connect our left side and our right side so that we can work more. So there are differences that we can't deny. I mean, you know, I am not, I wish I was 6 foot and you know, but I'm not, I'm 5'3". And I'm great. No, I'm just teasing. But, you know, we have to understand that we're different and are better at temperature, working under heat, working under cold, working with less sleep. But we don't realize that. So I think that, you know, when you look at the physical standard, there's that narrow level. And yes, RMC has a difference between women and men. But if you go back to the military and our forces test, you know, the forces test is gender neutral. To pass, it's the same standard for men and women. So the easy way is to look at the physical differences and say, yeah, the men have to run faster, they have to do more of this, it's not fair. Okay. However, the science behind that says that men are physically better, so therefore we should expect more. But there's also the strength of women and other stuff. But we've just never looked at those strengths. I mean, one that is obvious is that when you look around, the majority of the executive assistant to a lot of the 3-star and the 2-stars are female. Why is that? You know, well, there is a reason, because women can multitask better. I mean, it is in our brain that we can do it better than men. Men have a tendency, so again, a little bit of a breakdown between left side, right side. They're really focused on a path forward. They look at that path and they're going to get to it. Women, because we're connected, we tend to be able to do 10 different things. So that's why women make better EAs. So we have to stop looking at the differences and look at the strength and be able to better sell them. And I would recommend that book on gender intelligence as a really good foundation for looking at the differences and the strength and explaining really the science behind it.
Okay, thank you. Is the book title Gender Intelligence?
Yeah, it's gender intelligence, and it's on my library shelf, but I'll put it on, I'll send an email, but if you Google gender intelligence, it's a really good book.
Okay, great. Bob Martin was asking for the title, so I'm happy to relay by email the full title and the name of the author. All right, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you all for the questions, and thank you, General Bourgon, for the update and the analysis on how the CAF's doing when it comes to Resolution 1325 implementation. I think your presentation helped us really understand the varied nature of this portfolio. I think everyone has a set idea of what it is, and it's really multi-layered. So I think your presentation really did it justice, and also identified areas of challenges for further and deeper implementation of the WPS agenda. So sincere thanks to you, and sincere thanks to everyone in the audience taking some time over lunch to join us. Please stay tuned, everyone, for more CIDP activities, and see you all very soon. Thank you.